Hello there, my friends. We are looking today at a knife that I have extracted from its perilous position on the shelf.
The shelf! Touch me on the bar!
The Buck Marksman. So the shelf is a place where I put knives that I don't particularly want out of my collection, but I never find myself actually carrying.
Actually using is a different thing altogether.
By the way, of course, you all know Bricky.
Ass.
He's here to throw in some light extra conversation and whatnot.
I guess it could be worse. My brother is a Tormek wheel.
So let's get chatting about the Buck Marksman. So first, to get an idea of how big this thing is.
Can I just say? The sound of that snapping makes my genitalia suck into my body cavity.
Let's have a look at it next to some other blades. This is it next to the TRM Atom, a similar sized knife. The TRM Atom has a thinner blade and thinner handle, and a much different locking mechanism. This is it next to the Benchmade Super Freak in M4 steel. I'd suggest this has a similar purpose of use as the Buck Marksman.
Ruining the family liquidity.
However, the Buck Marksman is slightly more aggressive, or you could even say tactical looking. This is it next to my Spyderco Police, a longer and larger knife with a superior steel being K390. The 154cm in the Buck Marksman has aged fairly well for a non-powdered steel, but the K390 will cut for days longer. And this is it next to the Spyderco Spidey Chef, one of my favourite everyday carry knives, again a knife of a similar size.
Excuse me, but what the fuck is that?
Well, I'm glad you asked, Bricky. This is the Half-Breed Blades Large Bush Folder.
Your hands seem entirely too girly.
Possibly.
But it's probably a great knife for guys like you. You know what I mean.
The Large Bush Folder is about as big as you can get a folding knife before you go and shop with Mr. Medford. Or Mr. What's his name? What's his name, Bricky? The guy who makes the,
Awful YouTube videos. His name is you.
The guy who makes the giant knives. Rich Made Knives. About as big as you get before you graduate to those guys.
Remember to gradually work your way up through sizes rather than shoving any of these things straight up your butt.
So all that being said, the Buck Marksman Tanto is a bit of a jazzier looking version of a little bit less intense looking knife, the standard Buck Marksman. So this is the Tanto version. I got this from my friend Scott, who I've sent things back and forward from time to time, and it's been in my collection for about 2 years. It has seen purposes of relatively intense use.
You know, when the soft butter is gone and you have to use hard cooking butter.
But lately it has, again, as I said, been relegated to the shelf, where it sits with my quiet yet remote admiration.
I wish I had his remote admiration. He put me in front of him when he went to the toilet yesterday.
So the Buck Marksman Tanto has a hollow grind on a Tanto, which is fairly interesting because it ends up with almost a compound with how it is presented to. So you've got hollow grind all along this flat part here, and then the tip thickens out to a bit of a flat grind, simply to provide a little bit of extra strength there, I believe. It has a jazzy swedge cutout, which is a non-sharpened swedge, of course, which again straightens out before it gets to the rather heavy Tanto tip. It does have a thumb hole to open with, however I would not really recommend using that. And why would you? Because it has one of the smoothest and flickiest flippers I've ever managed to get my hands on. It is a truly free-falling knife. And that is, of course, because of how this knife is assembled. This knife has a lock like few other knives. It is not reliant on any leafs or buttons or anything that really needs to interface with any other part of the blade, apart from the notch that appears to, with the express purpose of interacting with the lock. So what you get then is a blade that doesn't have any detent balls or any locking levers pushing against the back of it or rubbing up against it when the knife is closed. So it truly does fly out. The knack with this knife is the timing of removal or raising of your locking leaf, which is along the back of the blade. So a piece of steel is attached from these 2 points here along the back, which catches onto this tag, which is cut into the knife blade. So that tag cruises around. Let's try and get a good shot of it. You know what? I'll put one separately. That's a good idea, isn't it, Bricky?
Allow me. There you have it, folks. The best part of the video.
So simply pushing the blade back causes it to lock under this leaf once again. And the way to disable it is to lift up the leaf, freeing the blade. Of course, once you've had it for a while, you end up with a fairly snappy method of opening and shutting. It almost feels like an automatic knife or something. It is reliant on a bit of tension here and there on both the opening and the closing, and it is still not a perfected process even with me. Sometimes you get a couple of these where it bounces back on you, but you could always just close it like a normal person as well. So there we are. It's an interesting construction. It's not an integral, it is 2 pieces. You can modify this locking bar here. There is a little screw in the butt of the knife there where you can drill, screw in and alter the tension. You can also alter the tension using these screws here. The whole thing also is fairly fixable if you start to notice the slack or something developing. So it's kind of cool. I've thought a long time ahead. What is most interesting about this knife is it's a buck knife. It's designed by Grant and Gavin Hawke, who make all sorts of cool iterations of existing types of knives. So they've got their deadlock out the front knife, which is kind of like the best deadlock.
He means the best out the front. I should really stop helping him and let it all burn to ashes.
They've had all sorts of weird and wacky kind of knives. The mud knife, which is like the best of the pivots, which is entirely sealed and doesn't let any mud into it. All sorts of kind of mad scientist kind of ideas going on in the knives, and it's really cool to see Buck pick up one of these blades and say, we're going to make that a mainstream. And it is a mainstream buck knife. You can get this in all sorts of configurations, and it is probably their, for lack of a better description, coolest knife.
Lessons on what's cool. From the man who listens to anime soundtracks.
So there we are. The 154cm steel has always held a good edge for me. 154cm is probably my favourite non-powdered steel. This one has developed a little bit of rust on the tip because I most likely simply didn't wash it correctly before I put it onto the shelf. There we go, my bad. I very seldom have issues with 154cm rusting, although it can happen with any steel. Except for maybe Nitro 77.
Or a swift kick in the groin.
The price of this guy is usually around the 110, 120 ballpark for the base models. They do a few different sprints and a few different blade steels. I don't know if I'd get the Tanto if I was choosing it for myself. That being said, it's a pretty usable Tanto. I quite like this extra kind of tip that you get on that squared off point. Something about it though has made it less carried for me over time. So that may well be just the appearance of it.
Too masculine maybe.
Or it may be the every now and then I find myself sitting playing with it on the couch, driving my wife a bit crazy because it's quite a high impact action. It's very kind of clicky clacky. It's not just your snickety snacky like the usual line locks are, for example.
Click clack. Sticky snacky.
Dilly dally shilly shally.
Significantly more percussive. Several elements have been at play which have meant that I really do like this knife. I just don't carry it particularly often. It has a really good deep carry clip, and the milled aluminium, whilst it is not the most fancy material, I find it provides good grip due to the patterns and also a nice interface with the very good pocket clip to mean that it sits nicely in your pocket without getting stuck and having to pull out bits of your pants with it. Some G10s I find are a little bit too like that, but this one carries and travels really well with me. For whatever unquantifiable reason,
he is too dumb to sharpen a Tanto.
We are not sure why, but it lives on the shelf. It isn't going anywhere else. It's not leaving the collection. It's not leaving the knife lab, but I believe on the shelf it may stay, apart from perhaps the odd special occasion when I feel like carrying something a little bit more dramatic, a little bit more artistic. and take the buck marksman with me once again for a day.
This part is where he thought about the Torma gag, and made the components of it quickly while forgetting to turn the camera off. It's crap like this that makes editing a nightmare. Here's the part where he does the scream. 34,000 subscribers. 34,000.